say it right at the top.
Welcome back, Steelers, to another episode of the New Standard. And as always, I have my partner in crime to my left, Neil Coulong. And the reason why we're laughing is because I said a joke about new Steelers guard Nate Herbig last night on the show. And thank you, Neil, for hopping in, doing another show. And yes, Double H, I was trying to figure out and investigate the U.S.'s down drone off the coast of Crimea. Hence the fatigues, so that's what I was doing yesterday. And we made a joke yesterday, instead of calling him Nate Herbig, she big, but then that got looped into she her. And so it's Nate she her, or Nate Herbig, or Nate she big. Whichever one we choose, that'll be the one we use. As always, if you want to participate in the show, you can catch us on YouTube. Do a search for the New Standard and Lance Williams or Neil Coulong. Also, you could do a search for us for the show, The New Standard, on podcast platform. And please subscribe there. Breaking news, Neil. Why don't you hit us with the breaking news?
The breaking news, at least breaking as of about 2 hours ago, the Steelers confirmed they have restructured the contract of free safety Minka Fitzpatrick, clearing up roughly $10 million in cap space, which probably puts them somewhere between $4 million in space and zero. So if you take into account the signings that have not gone through reporting yet, the dollar amounts for the signings of Sheebig, Cole Holcomb, and Patrick Peterson, I would put it probably around like 3 or 4 million, something like that. I don't think they're necessarily done with contract related moves, but they're not in a very actionable position to spend on a whole lot else right now. I'm not saying they're done, but we'll wait for other moves. But the Minka deal, the Minka restructure is not surprising. It was probably the lowest hanging fruit that made the most sense. He had another 4 years left on his contract to spread out the restructured signing bonus. They did that last year with TJ Watt. I would not expect them to do it again this year, but that option is out there. Something of a new deal with void years for Cam Hayward is a possibility as well. They have the ability to clear some space if they see something that they want in the market. As usual with the Steelers and free agency, we're not going to have a real good idea of who they're going after until it's reported that they've struck a deal. So we'll wait and see with that, Lance. It's still early in this entire process. The league year is not even 24 hours old. A lot more to go.
Yeah, and if you look at the specifics, according to Over the Cap, nice breakdown, Neil. Minka's base salary is $1.08 million. The proration on his deal is $6.855 million. His guaranteed salary, obviously, is the paragraph 5 to $1.08 million. So his cap charge for the year is $7.935. No way that they cut Minka Fitzpatrick, but on a post June 1st cut, the dead money would be 7.9734. On a pre-June 1st cut, the dead money charge would be 28.5, and the cap savings would be a minus $20.5 million. So needless to say, Minka Fitzpatrick is not getting waived. And like Neil said, Over the Cap does not have all of the transactions that we're going to talk about. Herbig, as well as Larry Ogunjobi and Patrick Peterson, and some of the other deals accounted for on the cap. So if you were to go to Over the cap for the Steelers right now is $15.5 million, which is not a true number. It is very fluid and it is moving in warp speed. So let's start with the first transaction. Let's start going from, I guess we could go from Wednesday to Monday, to the beginning of the tampering period. And the latest deal, and let me give you all the deals, listeners, or all the transactions. And I'll count it down from the 15th. On the 15th, the Steelers agreed to terms with Cole Holcomb on a 3-year contract. On the 14th, they re-signed DeMonte KZ to a 2-year deal. They brought back Larry O on a 3-year deal, and they signed Nate Herbig to a 2-year deal. Shebig. And on March 10th, they also brought in Patrick Peterson as well. And that's the crux of all the deals that they're going to do. So which from a player perspective, which one intrigues you the most, and which one do you want to dive into first?
I think that the intriguing one clearly is Peterson, mostly because of the name recognition. And I think he would probably stand in line to receive the most snaps out of any of them, although I believe he and Holcomb would probably be roughly the same level. But Peterson is probably going to be a guy on the outside. You're looking at 92% of the snaps this season. I would guess that. His lack of versatility, as in he's not going to be able to play inside, I wouldn't think that would affect him a whole lot as far as getting snaps, but they're not going to rotate the outside corners, I don't think, as much as we've seen in the past, because they don't have the versatile piece like they had with Cam Sutton. So I would think he'd get the most amount of time. That would make him the most intriguing overall. But Holcomb is an interesting body of work. I spoke yesterday in an individual episode here on the New Standard that he is. I'm not comparing him in any way to Robert Spillane, but just to have a frame of reference, he is probably going to be better in coverage. He's a better athlete. He is not the run stopper that Spillane is, but the value in coverage is probably a lot higher in today's NFL than just that kind of two gap. Old school middle linebacker, which is what Spillane probably was a little bit more. It's interesting to see what they'll do with that. We saw some nice things out of Mark Robinson last year, coming on late at the end of the year. I'm not surprised they would bring in a veteran, likely to replace Devin Bush, who, by the way, is reportedly visiting with the Seahawks today at some point. I can't imagine the Steelers wanted to bring Bush back. I think Holcomb represents probably a mainstay for them. 3 downs, but not somebody that's going to play in the deepest of sub packages. But he, not even though that's I'm not even sure it's that big of a difference. I think you get a lot of what the Steelers have wanted out of that other linebacker opposite the big tackling machine like they have with Myles Jack. You have somebody that can play off a little bit. He's not a good blitzer. He's not real adept in terms of blowing up the A gap, which is something to Devin Bush's credit. He did pretty well. I'm not sure if they're looking to fill that sort of a role with anybody. The draft is still coming up, but Holcomb, how they use him, I would think he's going to be a high snap type of contributor as well. I don't know how great he's going to be overall, but he's a solid NFL veteran. I would imagine that's what they're paying him to be. So you hope for the best, but it's not like he's a foundational member of the team or anything like that. He's not. I would guess. We haven't seen the numbers. I can't imagine he's getting big money. So with that, you can kind of temper your expectation based on what the team sees him as leading into the season. But a nice signing. You're not going to complain about that. I think he's probably going to be an upgrade over Devin Bush from a consistency perspective. From a character perspective, all I really have to go on is a couple people in media out in D.C. say he was a big locker room guy. They loved him, big effort, and he has a mullet. So
I was going to say that he has a mullet, man.
That's kind of nice. He's got kind of the James Conner back in 2018 look going for him, and good, great. You want the locker room guy. You want the effort guy. I kind of like that. It's good. It's nothing I'm going to freak out about. I don't think it gives them an additional 2 wins this year, but a solid player and at a position they needed to fill with a veteran.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in time, I think what people have to understand is you got to fill roster spots. I mean, you need bodies, and everybody that you sign. And that was kind of a pun, that you sign is not necessarily going to be a star, but they will play a role. And it's interesting that you brought in Devin Bush, and we talked about Spillane, the Whole Foods Food version is Spillane. And Spillane, I believe, went to the Raiders. I had heard Neil, that Devin Bush was playing for the XFL in costume, that he was getting in shape and he was playing for the XFL, and just getting some snaps in, getting some reps as part of his preparation for the upcoming NFL season. Maybe I got that wrong.
Reps and preparation don't seem like things that Devin Bush wants to do, but I don't know. I can't rule anything out. Okay. I wanted to address this really quickly as well. I saw this a couple times from people, and I must have missed it from Jeremy Fowler last night. The Steelers were in on Orlando Brown, the offensive tackle, formerly of the Chiefs, and before that, the Ravens, who signed a 4-year, $64 million deal with the Cincinnati Bengals. I believe that was this morning. Actually, no, Fowler's crediting Tom Pelissero with that deal. Interesting. I think it's important to point out that when you say a team is in on a player, and obviously they didn't sign him, he signed a 4-year, $64 million deal with almost half of it, $31 million, in a signing bonus. The Steelers being in on the conversation doesn't mean they negotiated. It doesn't mean that they offered him 4 years, $60 million. We don't know what that level of interest is, short of, hey, you're still unsigned. What would you sign for? And that's you file that under due diligence. Every team does that. I think if we take anything away from that, it's less that they actively were pursuing Orlando Brown and more they were sniffing around for a veteran tackle, which, I think if you could get Orlando Brown on the cheap, if you could get a deal with him, because he spent probably a little bit longer in free agency than you might have expected. If his market is pretty slow to develop, a team like the Steelers, it's smart of them to jump in and see, hey, you know what? Do you want to play for the best brand in sports? Do you want to come here? We'll treat you right. We're not going to pay you what other teams are, but we're not going to, destroy your career the way some other teams do too. So I think it was probably just a, hey, what's going on type of call. Where are you at financially? Just a guess, simply because the money that Brown should have expected to make, and this might even be a little bit under what I thought he would get, except for the $31 million signing bonus. I think he signed for probably a little bit less. So the Steelers wouldn't have been in that market at all. They don't, their cap position doesn't represent it. That's a lot of money they would have paid out to a guy in a very uncharacteristic move for them. I think it might have been just a exploration call. Let's see where he is. And it being reported out this way is more to hype up the agent's client than anything else.
Interest is a funny word, and I'm sure we've all had those friends that when you go out to the club, when we were all clubbing, and what's up to my guys, CNH Pure Cane Sugar, what's up, baby? And there's always your guy, your friend that says, oh yeah, she was interested in me. Like, interested is, also defined in terms of the eye of the beholder. Now, interested could have been she looked at you. Interested could have been she held your hand. Interested could be she gave you her number and a kiss and said, call me in 2 hours. Interest could be anything from that perspective. And there's also interest from the other side. The player has to be interested in the Steelers for it to even matter as well. We don't know what the level of interest from Orlando Brown was. Interest, when I hear that and I read those articles, it's just a tease. It's just a tease. And like Neil said, it's agent stuff. It's agent stuff. It's for their purposes, and all it does is tease fans the fan base that didn't get the player, because they're upset, because they're like, oh, what if we could have got Orlando Brown? We would have had 7 championships. Oh, he was interested. We don't like him now.
The Steelers tackles have always been foundational members of their championship teams.
I mean, we just never know what we never know what interest is, and it's a two-way street. Also, wanted to dig into some PFF numbers in regards to Holcomb, in a comparison between Holcomb, Spillane, and Bush, and it's interesting the description that you gave. And it always sounds like a law firm when you say like three names back to back: Holcomb, Spillane, and Bush Protection Agency, or whatever. Or just like if you said Dan Less and Shebig, you know,
It's our brute
the lawyer
force
service.
offensive lineman right there.
Shebig Less.
It just sounds fantastic, doesn't it?
Shebig Less. Let me give you some PFF numbers for each player in the following categories: overall, run defense, pass rush, coverage, passer rating allowed, yards per reception, interceptions, targets, and receptions. Now, I have not seen Holcomb play. I want to dig into that. That's a little homework assignment for myself, just like I want to dig into Shebig or Herbig. And so in terms of overall, in terms of ranking, Holcomb was the highest ranked player at 58. The lowest ranked player was Spillane at 131. So needless to say, and Bush was 106. So needless to say, none of those players ranked very high in terms of PFF scoring. In terms of run defense, the highest graded player was Spillane. Like Neil mentioned, that Spillane is more of a traditional two-down backer. And so Spillane in and of itself ranked 29th. The other two players, Holcomb was 51st. Devin Bush was a paltry 121. In terms of the number that we're all interested in, and I'm just going to cap it here, is coverage. The coverage number, Holcomb was rated number one as well. He was 45th in terms of coverage. Spillane was the worst. His rank in coverage was 154. The passer rating against him was 127.6. Again, that was probably the worst of the three. And Devin Bush, surprisingly, was pretty good in coverage compared to Spillane and to Holcomb, but not great as well. So, again, like Neil was saying, is, based on the contract, and we always talk about the 3 Ps: performance, pay, and pedigree. You can kind of always, get a good clue as to what the organization feels about the player, especially when it comes to pay. And when you mix in pedigree, you definitely see what you think they think the guy is. Hopefully he's more than what that is, but I'm sure when we see the contract details, it'll probably show that he's just a guy, more or less, according to CNH. That's he's more or less just a guy. Another interesting signing, and let's dig into this. So let me ask you this real quick before we talk about the corners. Does Holcomb start? Is he a starter next to Jack?
Probably, if we want to get starter. I don't know.
Let's just say, does he play
at inside linebacker? I think that's more relevant than other positions. I think probably where we sit right now. Yes. Did they sign him to do that? We need to look at the dollars. If they're giving him $3 million, that's not a starter's contract. I mean, it's a little bit more than Spillane got last year. But that doesn't. And Spillane played plenty. He wasn't a starter though. I don't know if right now they're inside linebackers. The alpha is Myles Jack. He's the guy who's going to play the most. That's not even arguable. Where they sit right now, I would imagine Holcomb would be the guy over Mark Robinson, but that doesn't mean that there's not a role for Robinson somewhere in there. Probably in sub packages too. Maybe Jack is the one to leave the field. I would think they would want a run defender out there if they're only going to put one linebacker on the field. I don't know. A lot of different ways you can go with it. I'm really just couching this to say this absolutely doesn't mean they're not interested in drafting an inside linebacker. I mean, they pretty much have to. They're going to bring in another inside linebacker one way or another. So I can't say right now it wouldn't be like a premium pick guy. I wouldn't bet on that, but I wouldn't say everything's set now that you've signed Check's name, Cole Holcomb. I don't think it's over at that point.
And as Corey Hatcher said, I was like, he was the Walmart brand of inside linebackers. Here's the thing, and I'm sorry I set you up with that dud, because I know football well enough to know I shouldn't be speaking about it in terms of starter. Maybe I'll start moving forward, coining it with, how much is he going to play in base? Is he going to be the sub package guy? Whatever, because that's kind of what it all points out to now. Is situational football, sub package football, and the Steelers don't play base a ton anyway, so there's not a ton of value if you're the starter and you're coming out in base and they play 48, 50 snaps in nickel or in dime. He was the green dot. He was the green dot. I know everybody, makes a big deal out of being the green dot. I'm also the blue dot. Never mind. Behind the green dot. Is that what it is? But anyway, let's switch to. But anyway, let's switch to the cornerback position. Of course, the Steelers lose Cam Sutton, and they sign Patrick Peterson. Now, from a metric standpoint, and you guys, I think, did a really good job in breaking down Patrick Peterson and talking about some of the differences and making sure you check out that show that Neil did earlier this week talking about Patrick Peterson. Let's dig into a little bit of that. But when you look at the difference between Peterson and Sutton, I thought you guys did a great job in illustrating the differences between the two. Overall, even if you're just getting Patrick Peterson as an outside corner, from a metric perspective, he ranks very favorably according to PFF. According to PFF, overall, he was the 14th ranked corner, but his coverage grade, according to PFF, was 3rd, and his passer rating allowed was 6th, which is very good for a guy of his age. And also, he was 2nd in interceptions with 5. What's your thought of this deal, the comparison of the two players? And what do you think are the 5? How do you think the 5 top corners, who are they for the Steelers, and how do you think they'll be deployed?
To address the first part, we talked about this with Vikings Wire editor Tyler Fornes, a very sharp football guy and a great site if you're interested in just football dork kinds of stuff. Tyler does a great job with it. Really, what he spoke on as far as Peterson went was the defense that he played acted. It sort of funneled stuff away from him. He wasn't really asked to do a ton. But at the same time, you don't have to look at PFF grades as the end all be all, positively or negatively. What it says is this is what he did when the action came toward him. It doesn't speak to scheme. It doesn't speak to usage. It's just speaking to a guy playing football. Okay. People take it farther, I think, than what it's designed to be. Peterson did well with what he was asked to do. At the same time, it's fair to say he wasn't asked to do what the top level cornerbacks in the NFL would probably be asked to do. He played, I think anyway, a style that's similar to what Terrell Austin has been getting the Steelers to do, but they weren't successful in doing, certainly for the first half of last season, which was really a cover 3. You're carrying the wide receiver down the field on the outside. You're covering him deep. You're covering him short. You're going to let go of him when he goes across the middle. That's the part that Peterson's he lacks that elite quickness, that change of direction speed, because he's 33 years old. You don't keep that forever. It's the first thing to go. He would not be able to play a pure man scheme, but the Steelers don't play that. Not a whole lot of teams do anyway. He will do well because he's really long. He has very long arms, which means you can play. And Tyler and I talked about this as well. I was just looking for the clip. I wanted to put this in the chat. He can play what's called a bail technique, which is you're behind the receiver a bit. Your help is over the top. You're covering the underneath. When he moves around, you're not looking to stay with him shoulder to shoulder. You're playing underneath him. And when you're tall, when you have long arms, it's harder to throw over the top of that. Peterson can be an effective defender through technique. He's very experienced. He's very, very smart. He's a really good player. This is why the Steelers brought him in. They're not going to ask him to cover everything. They're not going to have Peterson Island. Let's put it that way. But he can be effective for what the Steelers ask him to do. It's a good signing. I'm excited about that. They're getting him. Tyler disagreed with this. I really don't think they're paying him all that much per the market. And I also think I mentioned this on the clip as well. You can sometimes pay a premium to a veteran, knowing that it's like this. Your market's probably $5 million a year. We're going to pay you $6.5 million. This is why we're going to bring in a young cornerback. We want you to be his shadow. We want you to show him life on and off the field. We want you to talk him up. We want you to help us coach him, develop him. It's our job to coach, but show him the nuance, take him through drills, things like that. And veterans will sign for that kind of thing. And the Steelers have been criticized often in the past of overpaying their internal veterans. Maurkice Pouncey is the one I can remember most clearly. They made him the highest paid center in the game. One, that's sort of how the market always works. The next guy up the next high level guy up tends to be the highest paid one. Along with that, though, Maurkice was the ardent spokesperson of the locker room. Ben was the face of the team. Ben would defer to Pouncey. When Pouncey spoke, everybody listened to Pouncey. They paid him to continue that way, to echo what the coach is saying, to be on board with the franchise. Those sorts of things come with a premium. We're going to pay you more. We expect these kinds of things from you. It's Cam Hayward now. Not to suggest that Cam Hayward doesn't deserve the money that he's getting. It's just that's what they expect from him. He's going to be the vocal leader of the team. People are going to look to him for leadership, both through his words and his actions. I think there's something to be said for that with a veteran like Peterson. He has easily the best resume of anybody on the team, I think, right? That's not out of line,
absolutely.
Is it? Patrick Peterson's a Hall of Fame player. First ballot or otherwise, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And he played well last season. I'm not trying to trash his PFF grade. I just don't think that they're necessarily as comparable as PFF wants them to be. They're players that do different things. Peterson, for what they're going to ask him to do, I think he can play pretty well. That's not all that dissimilar to Joe Hayden either. So again,
that's what I was thinking.
And if you want to draft a young cornerback, which I don't see how they don't. I don't think there's a way in the world they're not going to draft a corner with one of their first 3 picks. There's no way that's going to happen. A guy like Patrick Peterson with his locker next to him, he's going to be with him on the road. It makes sense to pay a little bit of a premium for that, in my opinion. I would conduct business that way if I were in charge.
Yeah, mark the tape. Absolutely. And for us saying that, Patrick Peterson or the draft pick is going to be mentored by Patrick Peterson. I mean, when you look at the deal, when you look at the financials, it reeks of that the Steelers are probably going to get a corner. I'm going to say in the first 2 picks. I think in the first 2 picks, they come out with a corner. Definitely in the top 3. When you look at his deal, the details of it is he signed a 2-year, $14 million deal, received a $5.85 million signing bonus. Of course, that gets prorated out over the 2 years of the deal. And the way that the deal is structured, his cap charge this year is $4.22 million. Next year is 9.7. He will not be a Steeler in 2024.
Not at that price. No.
Not at 9.7.
They'll eat what, 2.9 dead, something like that.
Yeah, they'll eat 2.9 dead next year.
It's funny though, because I agree with you. And I remember you and I said the exact same thing about Myles Jack last year. Yet here we are.
Yes.
Yes. It's not that he and Mitch Trubisky, by the way, it's not that he will be cut. It's that the team has they have a decision to make, and they can. And Peterson can hit free agency again next year if he's still got some game or he wants to retire. It's not going to kill the Steelers if that's the case. If he does play, he gets a little bit of a raise. The team's got to take the cap because that's that's the business. It's not a bad deal, really. It's a 1-year deal with kind of a team option with a little bit of pain to decline a second year. Not literally, but that's sort of how you can interpret it.
Yeah, it's definitely an easy deal to get off if they want it, and if he plays pretty well, it's something that they could do something with. And even if they kept the number, if he played well last year, a good corner at 9.7 is not a bad thing, considering Cam Sutton's a very solid player and his APY is 11, although he's a lot younger. So in terms of, how they're going to be used. Of course, we think Patrick Peterson is going to be an outside corner for them. Do you think he travels? And who do you think is the other outside corner? Is it Witherspoon? Is it Wallace?
Yeah,
What do you
I didn't
think that?
answer that part of it.
Yeah,
He won't travel. They don't do that. There are situations in which he might, but that isn't. I know what it sounds like. I know what it looks like. When you have Darrelle Revis, I can understand wanting to do that perhaps a little bit, but at the same time, doing that gives away a lot of what you're doing defensively, and it leverages the rest of your defense. In other words, let's say put him on. I don't know. Put him on the kid from Cincinnati, Jamar Chase. Say that they're going to travel with Chase the whole game. All Cincinnati has to do is put him in motion to confirm that that's happening. And if you know that he's going to travel, you can run him away from everything else and flood to one side. And if everybody else, if they're not man up straight the entire way, you've got a hole in your zone that isn't all that hard to figure out. I can figure it out. So I don't think that's the best strategy against everybody. I think there are opportunities in which you might want to do that. There are situations, but overall, he's definitely not going to do that. He's not going to be able to cut inside and accelerate on a guy like Jamar Chase and make up ground. He's just not that player anymore. In his prime, he could. That said, a guy like Akella Witherspoon, a guy like Levi Wallace, they never could. So it's not as if that's a common issue, and it doesn't downgrade anybody's value not being able to do that. That's just an elite level skill to be able to handle. That said, I don't think they're done with cornerback. I think there are two questions still that need to be addressed. They'll probably need a fifth. The way they're looking right now, Peterson's an outside guy, as is Wallace and Witherspoon. You've got Arthur Mollett inside. I think we can collectively agree they're going to draft a premium pick cornerback. So there's your fifth guy. Who else do you have? Are you going to bring in somebody else to camp? I mean, you pretty much have to. Is that a vet free agent you're going to sign now, or are you going to do the quintessential Kevin Colbert and look for that deal in the secondary free agency market when they sign the cornerback that you may or may not have ever heard of before in like June or July leading into camp, or make a move during camp, somebody else that's going to get cut elsewhere. There's a lot of wisdom in the idea of picking up at a cheap price an experienced NFL cornerback to play something of a reserve role. I would argue James Pierre fits that bill. I would think, though, they might want another guy inside. Mollett is probably not a 900-plus snap guy. You're going to see nickel on the Steelers' defense above anything else. You might want some depth there, at least for camp. You might want to work some guys out, get to know them in case of injury. I would think they're going to go in that direction, but there's also the possibility of drafting an exclusive slot type of cornerback late, or signing one in undrafted free agency, maybe stash him on the practice squad, let him build up. It wouldn't surprise me if they make, two rookies end up two rookies right now that we don't know who they are on this roster and or the roster in the practice squad coming up.
Yes, it's going to be interesting because
that's interesting.
Because if they go Landon Roberts, breaking news. Thank you, Mark, for posting that. I am not familiar with that player.
That's the guy that. Hang on. Talk about the cornerbacks again.
Here's the thing I think that's interesting with the cornerback position is if they draft the cornerback first round, I think they try to get him on the field immediately. And I think he would be the other outside corner with Patrick Peterson, and you play those two guys. And in some sort of sub-package defense, you would have some sort of iteration of those three guys. It was interesting to me, speaking about the corners, that they, I guess not much that they didn't tender anything to James Pierre, but it's going to be interesting what that cornerback room looks like and, how it shakes out. I don't think they have a great corner on the roster. I think you have a bunch of average guys. I think solid guys, but I think you have scheme flexible guys, and I think you have you have some depth at the position. You have guys that could do different things. as the chat goes on and on about the player. I'm just going to guess he's a guy. He's a depth guy. I'm going to guess that he's another depth guy, and he's going to be a special teams guy as well. Not familiar with the name, but
Roberts? Or did you switch over to Roberts now?
no, I was talking about the guy, yes, that they just signed.
Yeah,
Not
Landon
sure.
Roberts is an inside linebacker. I don't, if anything, I would say he's the Spillane. So I wouldn't say that he is necessarily a lock to do anything. He might just be purely a depth guy, but that's what I was talking about earlier. I don't think they're done at linebacker, and this shows it. He can't be worth a whole lot. He played for the Patriots starting off his career in 2016. He's been with Miami the last 3 seasons. He started for the Dolphins, a tackling type of guy, but a situational guy, not a playmaker. He's a run stopper. He's an early down guy in the traditional sense. I wouldn't think that would be a guy who would start. But again, this is kind of what I mean when I say there's a lot of different things you can do with linebackers. If anything, he'd probably be more like Myles Jack than he would Cole Holcomb, which I don't know if that says a whole lot either way. But he's an experienced veteran, a solid run defender, not a pass coverage guy. I would think, just based on the nature of the Steelers defense and the way offenses play nowadays, I would think that Roberts would be more of a depth piece, perhaps a special teams player. They could be looking for that as well. Let's keep in mind, your inside linebackers, if you're not a starter, you better play special teams. And the Steelers, as of right now, have not signed Derek Watt back, and they have not signed Miles Boykin back. They've got Miles Killebrew on the last year of his contract. But if they want to focus on special teams, I would think Roberts might fit in that role a little bit better. I'm trying to dig in a little bit to see what his experience with that is. As a starter the last 2 years, he might not have a good amount of experience with that, but really the last 3 years for him in Miami. But it might be more in those lines. Let's see what they're paying him. Before anything else, let's see what they're paying him.
Yeah.
He was a special teams guy in New England. I know that. He played a bunch for him defensively, but he played on special teams as well. So we'll see.
Yeah, those P's always come into it. That always clears up the clouds when it comes to looking at a player, is that P part of the 3 P's: performance, pay, and pedigree. Last question about the corners. Not knowing what they're going to do, of course, with the draft. And even if they drafted a guy, first round corner, how big is the loss of Cam Sutton? Is this group you anticipate being equal, better? How big is that loss of Cam Sutton? I think it's a significant one.
I think from a versatility perspective, they lose a bit. They lose the flexibility we talked about often last year, Lance, when the Steelers were kind of overhauling their defense, bringing in some new personnel. I felt they were building it based on versatility. And versatility today means you have a very deep secondary. They signed a lot of veterans that could do a lot of different things. Sutton was kind of the figurehead of that beyond Minka. In terms of Sutton can play the most positions. He can play inside, outside, on either side. There's value in that. I think he's a tough player to lose. As I understand it, the Steelers were interested in bringing him back. The Lions ended up paying more than they were willing to pay. I felt probably, if anything, I think he got a little bit less than market for what his versatility can bring. But he's paid a good chunk of change. He's getting $33 million over 3 years. So the Steelers didn't want to match that. I get it. I don't know who's going to replace that or if they want to do that, but I think they really need an inside and outside guy. That versatility, it does a lot within your defense. It gives you the ability to keep a guy on the field versus no huddle. It gives you the opportunity to match up specifically based on what an opponent has and what they're doing. You can be more strategic with a guy like that. And they don't have that guy. Mallett isn't going to be able to play on the outside. Levi Wallace isn't going to be able to play inside. Peterson can't play inside. Even if they bring back Pierre, he's not going to play inside. So I think it also limits them. Not limits, but you look at it like this. If you're going to draft at 72 or at 17 or 32, if you're going to draft a cornerback, it's not going to be a slot cornerback. You might get a guy that can play both, but he's probably not going to be able to do well at that his rookie year in the NFL. It's possible, but I wouldn't bet on it at 17 even. Maybe. I know how easy it is to name Joey Porter Jr. with all this, but Joey Porter Jr. is not an inside guy. So you're going to get a strong outside cornerback. That's where the money is at that position. But I'm not sure really even why that is. I think in many ways, for the dollar, your slot cornerback is the most important defender on the team, just because there are so many outstanding receivers who attack from the slot. They're kind of the same way. They can play outside and inside as well. Antonio Brown did that forever. He moved around everywhere. He attacked from anywhere on the line of scrimmage. When you have a guy inside and you're zoning up, you have to be ready for a guy like Antonio Brown. So to me, I would be I would be surprised if they didn't try to find a stronger inside corner, and that very well might be the guy that they would draft. But to draft him that high, he needs to be able to play outside as well. And I think they're a little bit loaded up on that. But yes, thank you, Mark. This is the point I wanted to get to as well. Let's keep in mind, you can drop a safety into that spot. I don't know how much success we've really seen with that. I don't know how good that is. But if you want to go into dime, the Steelers want to play dime with another safety, and that safety can play inside man coverage underneath. Minka did that for a little bit. We saw them experiment with that 2 years ago. They can go different directions. I just think to really bring all of that out, they need to find a versatile inside slot defender, and I don't know if they have that yet.
And let me jump into a couple of comments from you guys. Thanks, Mark. Mark wrote, I think KZ can play the nickel, but that is what they are missing the most from Sutton is the ability to play inside. They will also need to find a nickel cornerback. I thought Corey brought up a great point. Him being homegrown, that Sutton was the best homegrown cornerback that they had since Deshae Townsend. And it's part of the business. It's tough to lose guys that you train because you know what their traits are, your habits, you know how to deploy them perfectly. You scratch off some of those uncertainty boxes when you have a player that you coached and you groomed. And the last comment wanted to jump into was from Double H. He said Roberto apparently is a Flores favorite, must be a solo. I'd from Brian Flores to help fill our needs. Definitely. We'll have to wait to see Roberts. I think it was a typo.
Yeah, he's a solid veteran. Yeah, Roberts was with Flores in New England. I noticed he didn't sign with Flores. Who knows? He's a veteran. He's got some special teams experience. 3 dogs, 2 bones, I guess, between the linebackers to get the most snaps. I think if you put Holcomb and Roberts together, you have a good all-around linebacker. So situationally, I think it's smart to bring in 2 of them. I like that move. I thought they would try to find another linebacker somewhere. I said that at the top of the show, in fact. I like the idea of not having to worry about that position at a high level in the draft. Might still be stinging a little bit that Buddy Johnson didn't exactly work out. Not a ringing endorsement right now for Mark Robinson, but you don't cut him either. You've got 4 inside linebackers now. 3 of them have high levels of NFL experience, and there's one that's going to continue to develop. So, we'll see the money. Let's see what they're paying. I don't think they're paying him much. So it's we're not winning a Super Bowl because Landon Roberts made the team, but at the same time. You need the dudes, at some point you need to have guys, whether they're high level playmakers or not, which Roberts isn't, but he can chase down some kicks along with playing, your jumbo package defense, things like that.
Yeah, it's a body business. I mean, it's a body business. You need guys to fill out your roster, and there's not a ton of guys on the planet that have the athleticism, size, and speed to be on the NFL roster. And so it's a body business also. At the end of the day, wanted to jump into the KZ re-signing. Were you surprised that they brought back that they chose KZ over Edmonds? Why do you think they made that choice?
I joked about this in social media and with some friends of mine on a thread. I wouldn't be surprised if it not literally this, but something like this. Think of the scene in The Dark Knight, where Joker takes the two guys that they just ambushed, breaks the pool cue in half, and says, we've got 2 spots on our team. There are 3 of you. Figure it out. Whoever lives at the end gets the job. I think of it like the contract. Like, here's a 2-year contract. Throw it in the middle of the floor. Whichever one of you gets to it first and gets it back to us gets it, between him and Terrell Edmonds. Edmonds probably didn't dive after it because he probably has the athleticism and a pretty good last year to think that maybe he can get a little bit more. I don't know how much KZ got, though. That's kind of the key thing. But I don't. They weren't going to keep both of them, but I definitely think they wanted to keep one of them. And we can say that they chose KZ because KZ is the one that signed the contract or is going to, but I don't know if that's really fair either. It could have been as simple as that. Edmonds wants 4, KZ will do it for 3. They'll take KZ. That's kind of a no-brainer in my mind. I don't know if there's a huge difference between the two. KZ probably, as it was brought up before, might be able to defend the slot a little bit better than we saw Edmonds do. We saw Edmonds. They put Edmonds on an island a couple times last year for reasons I don't quite understand.
Yes, they did.
KZ probably has a little bit more versatility. I don't even know if that's fair. They're both solid NFL players. I don't think they would have minded having either one of them, but they weren't going to keep both. So with that, it could have been as simple as KZ was willing to do it for less.
I think when you look at the difference between the two players, from a PFF grade perspective, I think the biggest difference is their coverage ability. And I think from watching them, I think it would be safe to say that KZ has a better nose for the football and has better ball skills. Had 2 interceptions. And you could see where KZ is around the ball a little bit more from a pass coverage perspective than Edmonds. Edmonds is super versatile. One thing that you're going to have to replace with Edmonds is, until last year, Edmonds really didn't get hurt. Edmonds played a ton of snaps. And, to get the same type of value, KZ's going to have to play a lot of snaps. KZ's going to have to play a lot of snaps, stay healthy. Didn't play a ton of snaps last year. I believe he had some issues with performance-enhancing drug, was it? Am I right?
He had something like that. I was just thinking about that. I'm not sure what he did exactly, but he was suspended. So hurt and suspended. Not a good
that's not a good combination.
But
that's not
maybe
that's
one led to the other. I don't know.
That's like busted and disgusted. you can't have that combination
of the NFL's substance abuse policy. So not the PEDs policy. So he got popped for. I don't know this. I'm just saying to familiarize people with it. He got popped for smoking weed, not for steroids. That's what the suspension was for. I don't know what he did, but he violated the league's policy on substances of abuse, which is not PEDs. So
in terms of in terms of those passing metrics, the coverage grade for KZ overall for safeties was 14 to Edmonds is 58. Passer rating allowed, Edmonds 154 to KZ's 29.2. Excuse me, 132.4. 132.4. Sorry.
That's much better. That was that stretch of time they had him lined up on tight ends in the slot, and he just got worked. They didn't give him any help at all. It's like, come on, he's still 5'10". I mean, that's not a real fair matchup. Every quarterback's going to go straight to that every time, and it seemed like Tomlin and Austin really wanted to challenge Edmonds, and they really thought that he was going to win.
No, they wanted to make it easy. They wanted to make it easy for other teams in terms of yards per reception. Edmonds was ranked 143, gave up 14.9 per reception to KZ's 12, and KZ was ranked 113. Interestingly enough, I think when I looked at these metrics, I think Jimmy Ward was maybe, according to PFF, I think the worst safety who got a ton of snaps in coverage, that he got really torched up. Before we conclude the show, two other players I want to jump into, and I want to dig back into Nate Sheebig, Nate Herbig. And what does that mean for the Steelers' offensive line? Is he a starter? Is it a competition with Dotson?
Again, it's what they're paying him is going to answer that question far better than what I can tell you about what I know of his game. That said, I mentioned this in my solo show. I don't know what Kevin Dotson does internally, but they really don't seem to like him very much. He was the subject of a couple cat calls coming from the front office in terms of his work ethic, and there was a whole thing that sprung out of that. Everybody was just worshiping the guy after his rookie year. I think the team might have not really liked the attention that he got a whole lot, but he hasn't really improved. He's not a real strong player. He's a 4th round pick. He's got 2 years of starting experience now. I wouldn't say that he's junk, but he's not particularly great either. Them wanting to make an upgrade or seeing an opportunity to make an upgrade isn't surprising to me. That said, not knowing the money right now, I would think Herbig would be the starter. That's just my opinion of watching him on tape versus Dotson. I would think that, but that doesn't necessarily mean they gave him enough to come in and start. Just because they signed him early in free agency doesn't mean that the Steelers do things like this quickly. You know, do you ever notice how they take less time to announce their first round draft selection than any other team by far? It's like weird if it gets to 9 seconds, you know, that they're on top of that immediately. They do this with free agency as well. You know, you might recall, I mean, Trubisky, yes, you understand why you want to get ahead of the market with Trubisky, but I remember Joe Haig signed with them like 35 seconds into free agency. Maybe it wasn't Joe Haig. It was somebody that wasn't going to be a starter. And it gets everybody thinking that this guy's going to start. It's not necessarily the case. They're looking to get depth, and I just think that they don't like to waste time. They're not going to screw around. This is what they want. They're going to go get it. I would think right now Herbig would be the starter. That's me saying that today, watching his film. Not the greatest player you've ever seen, but you can see why they'd want him. He's tough, physical dude, nasty guy, not a great athlete, but he's a mauler, and they like that out of their guard. So
definitely a mauler.
Dotson, I had hoped would end up like that. I don't see that quite as often as I want, but he's also had 3 different offensive line coaches. They played gap a lot longer than I thought that they would. They didn't really get into inside zone until the second half of last year. When you saw the offensive line start to play much better, you saw Najee start to produce a bit more. Dotson had a hand in that. I don't want to, disrespect him and act as if he had nothing to do with it, but I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to make a move. I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to sign a player they feel is adequate depth inside, because maybe they don't like Kendrick Green anymore. It's no longer worth keeping him around. I could see why that might be the case as well. So we'll see. My guess is he'll be the starter, but we'll see.
They quietly, maybe they get rid of Kendrick Green. I mean, it's
hey, they don't have Hassenauer anymore either, so you got to back up your center somehow. And if I have no clue if Herbig can snap the ball, but I'm pretty sure he can snap the ball better than Kendrick Green can. If that's the case, then perhaps you have, the more versatile of the 2 players that you want. You could start Dotson and have a good 3-position interior line backup. I would think that that's a smart move for them.
I love the NFL because transactions typically give you a good idea of what a team thinks about a player. I mean, the 3 Ps, you can kind of frame all transactions within those. And if they go out and get a guard and you're the starting guard and your name isn't James Daniels, you should be nervous. But I think the most exciting transaction was the re-signing of Larry Ogunjobi. I was kind of surprised at that. I thought Larry O would get some money out in the market, or more money. I thought, I was surprised at that, and I'm happy that they brought him back. I think it's the most exciting transaction, and I think it's they're short at the defensive line, and I think defensive line is going to be another position that they target, I think, in free agency as well as the draft. How excited were you to hear and read that Larry O is going to be returning?
I think what they got in Larry Ogunjobi was the same length of contract that the Bears gave him, and they'll end up guaranteeing less money for the same player. Against the market, it's a brilliant deal. Great timing for the Steelers to have been able to jump in on that. Another reason why you don't necessarily want to go spend all your cap space in early March. You don't know what's going to happen. The second free agency wave happens kind of after the draft, after teams are able to evaluate who they just brought in, how they're going to be able to help the team this year. Then they're looking to see who's still out there to patch up whatever holes they weren't able to fill during the draft. Ogunjobi was one of those. He failed a physical in Chicago. He had a 4-year deal signed up with the Bears for a lot more money than what the Steelers are going to end up paying him. And he's a solid player. He played well, I thought. I think reports were kind of mixed on him, but you needed depth. You need another guy that can play a lot of snaps, and that's Larry O. I appreciated watching him last year in a lot of ways. I'm not saying he's a perfect player. I'm not saying that they should ignore defensive line as far as the draft goes, but Isaiah Loudermilk, DeMarvin Leal, they've put capital into the rebuild of their defensive line. Some have worked out, some haven't. Isaiah Buggs, by the way, just signed a 2-year extension in Detroit. He's still playing. I'm not sure if the Davis brothers are around anymore, but the Steelers wouldn't be hurt to bring in kind of a 1 or a 3 technique tackle to go along with Hayward and Ogunjobi over the next 2 years, assuming they're both still on the team. Leal is good depth. I still like Loudermilk. I think once Alu is out of the way, Loudermilk now probably sees the field a bit more. I don't know what this does exactly with Montravius Adams, but that's a contract that they could lose potentially. Maybe he's their guy fully, but bring in a young guy there, you can still carry 6 defensive linemen and have good depth. That's really what I think they've needed. Not because of a lack of skill necessarily, but just injuries have caught up to them a couple times. They've had cold stretches because they haven't had any defensive line help. I think it's a position you still want to look at, but Ogunjobi is absolutely a stalwart starter. You know, he's going to be a key piece of that defense, at least for 2 seasons.
Yeah, they could get off Montravius Adams. I'm looking at what the pre-June 1st cap charge would be, or the dead money if they cut him. It'd be under $1 million, and his cap charge this year is 3.2. So they could get off Montravius Adams if they needed to. One thing we didn't do in this show, and maybe we'll do it for another show, is I'm looking at some of the contracts, and I'm trying to think, is there any contracts that stand out as ones that they will restructure and or guys will get waived? Nothing's kind of jumping out at me as I look at it now. It was interesting that PFF put the Patrick Peterson
breaking
deal.
Breaking news, Lance.
Breaking news.
According to Adam Schefter, the Steelers have cut Myles Jack, which would explain why they're signing 2 linebackers. So
there you go.
Myles Jack release. Get the cap number if you have that in front of you. I believe he had an $8 million salary this year, but that frees up some space for the Steelers. And with that, okay,
cap savings
now
indeed.
Along with Adam Schefter's report that the Steelers have released veteran linebacker Myles Jack. Josina Anderson of CBS is reporting the Steelers have had preliminary interest in bringing back edge rusher Bud Dupree if they, quote, deem him healthy, which I don't think Bud Dupree has been healthy in 3 years, so I'm not sure if they're ever going to deem him healthy. But this has got to come at the end of the show, doesn't it, Lance? The Jack release, I guess, makes sense. I'm going to guess there's an injury history there, but he was paid a lot of money. I did not expect that they really wanted to keep him at $8 million. I thought they would have cut him maybe a little bit earlier, but not a surprise there. If you are, then this pushes back now to the argument that you have 2 veterans at linebacker and Mark Robinson. Still need another one. So now put it back into the draft, the draft decision-making matrix. You know, do you want to invest a high pick in an inside linebacker? Sign 2 brand new guys, starting the both of them. That's interesting. Definitely a new look defense if that's what they're going to do. But they've got a coverage guy and they've got a run stopper along with Robinson and allegedly somebody else. I would think that they would. As far as Dupree goes, I've said this all off season. He's not usually healthy, but he's not going to be a full complement snap guy anyway in Pittsburgh. what you need is what they've been trying to find, and they've had, with obviously the biggest example is Melvin Ingram, but what they don't have with the linebackers, and I think I said this at the beginning of the show before all hell broke loose with the Steelers linebackers here, they don't have an A-gap badass masher type of guy. Dupree can do that, stunting off of the edge. He can line up over the A-gap and he can rush. Dupree doesn't win one-on-one, but when he's healthy, he's still a very good athlete. He's explosive off the snap, which blows stuff up, and they can use him in that sort of situational pass rush role that they had DeMarvin Leal playing at times last year. Melvin Ingram did that quite a bit. A third outside linebacker, it's a position they need. Wouldn't surprise me, but it's all completely up to the contract for Bud. And I think they wanted to keep Dupree back in the day, but he was top of market money. Somebody was going to pay him that. Obviously didn't work out very well for Tennessee, but the Steelers can get a bargain. I can't imagine he is able to command a whole lot of money. And if you cut Jack, you've got some free. You're not paying Landon Roberts more than $2 million, I wouldn't think.
I mean, you could throw another
$2 million. So maybe Bud is an option. Like it's something like 5.
Yeah, I
five
mean,
might be light for a situational pass rusher, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to you can always throw this into the 3 Ps. They know his pedigree, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
They're very familiar with his performance and how he could perform in a scheme in their scheme. The most significant P is pay. This will all come down to his health and how much is he willing to take if they offer him a contract. That's what it'll come down to. If he's willing to play for the Steelers for a humble price, he could be a Steeler again. We'll see. It's interesting. I mean, the Steelers typically didn't do that, but they kind of broke the mold with Edmonds bringing back a guy that they didn't give an offer to, a 5th-year offer to. And so maybe it's something that they're more amenable to in doing in the future. And that'll be interesting. So it was interesting that they released Myles Jack. When you look on the salary cap perspective, his cap charge would have been $11.25 million. And I guess that should have been flashing. It's ironic. He's
got an $8 million base. It's one of those things
the
like
base
if we have to pay him, we will, but it's not hurting us much to cut him. He can't be more than like 2 or 3 dead, right?
No, the dead money is 3.25.
Yeah,
and the cap savings is 8. And the savings is 8, but they get 8 in savings, so it's a net about 4.
No, it's not net. That's not how it's calculated. They save that money on the cap. It's just he counts for that. It's the difference between what his number was.
Difference. Yeah, I'm just calling it net.
You don't reconcile it a second time.
No, you don't reconcile it a second time.
It's important to know that it's a net of 8.
Yeah.
They just have to count him at 3.25. So the savings is 8 total. But very good. That's that money. That money plus the Roberts signing plus Bud is probably equal. So I think that's what they're kind of looking to do. But I'm not against that. I like Jack as a player. I could see why they'd want to move on at that price. Jack's agent would insist upon that big of a roster salary because it's like, I want my client to be paid or I want you to cut him so we can go be a free agent again, either of these options is acceptable to me. It forces the team into a decision, and it's not a very painful decision. So Jack can go out with a year of tape. And I wish him well. I thought he did fairly well. He's not the player that he was. He's also played a ton of snaps, and he's got a degenerative knee condition. So his career wasn't going to last an incredible amount of time. But I thought he did pretty well for what they asked him to do.
Yeah, and and this is why we love the NFL, because it's so fluid. Everything changes very quickly and very rapidly, because now, Jack was their best inside linebacker. He was a Steeler like an hour ago. And now, although they did these transactions recently, I think they have some questions at the inside linebacker position because they have 2 guys that they don't have a lot of familiarity with that could possibly be starting inside for them. So that'll be interesting. That leads to the other, going down another rabbit hole of, how are they going to address this? What are they going to do? Are they going to go after another player in free agency? Are they going to draft one? What does this say? It's going to be interesting. I would think, like you said, and I thought it was a good point, you would not want two guys new to your scheme starting at inside linebacker.
That's what they're looking at right now.
And that's
I
what
don't
they're
know.
looking at right now.
If Mark Robinson counts as a veteran, then
Yeah.
maybe you have that. But it's a brand new linebacking group, brand new linebacker coach. Their linebacking core now is their offensive line for the last couple of years. New
Let's
guys,
jump into
new
this
coaches.
question.
That's what they're doing the linebackers now.
Let's jump into this question, Neil. And thank you, Carmichael, the sports guy, for the super chat. And make sure you like and subscribe to the show. And if you feel so kind to give a super chat, a financial tribute to the show, a contribution to the show, please do. Let's jump into this question from Carmichael, the sports guru. And the question is, can you restructure an already restructured deal?
Yeah, I addressed this in the chat as well. I don't think there's a rule that wouldn't allow you to do that. There might be, but typically when you do that, you get it to the amount that you want it to be.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind, this is all part of a very well calculated plan. There aren't variations to the plan all that often. They're talking about millions of dollars. They're talking about dozens of players in their lives. They have a good sense of what they're trying to accomplish. They're not going to restructure to the point where they have nobody left and they'd have to do another guy another time, because whatever it is that's coming up wouldn't be something that's a part of the plan. So to deviate from that, it's just, it's not how you plan things when millions of dollars are involved. You have the biggest department in any NFL team is their accounting department. There are probably 100 accountants working on all of this stuff. It's a very complex machine. They know what money they have. They know what they want to do with what player, and that's what they're operating on. Now it will change if it works or not, but as far as the restructuring goes, you don't need to do it. You're not going to need to do it a second time. They get it down to the point where they want it to be because they know what the future cap numbers will be for the players. That's kind of what they're looking at. And if we want to pick nits on it, though, Minka got what you would call a full restructure, meaning they brought him down to the veteran minimum base amount, meaning they converted every dollar that they could of his base salary this year into a signing bonus. That's what you probably want to do if you've got 4 years left on your contract, which is where Minka is going into the 2023 season. So you can maximize the cap space that he has available. The Steelers usually have a guy that they're going to do that with. So that was part of their plan. They knew they were going to do that. The Jack decision, the timing of it might have been more, let's see what's out there. We like a Landon Roberts better, apparently. So we can sign Roberts, but we're going to pay for that by cutting Jack. If they couldn't get somebody, they would have kept Jack. Probably not the price they would have wanted. That's a big reason why they were looking to find somebody cheaper at probably the same level of production. But the restructure piece comes as part of a plan. They know what they're doing. It's not like, an impulse buy to go out and get somebody in the market. They keep very detailed tabs on everybody, which, going back to the point that we began the show with, as far as like Orlando Brown goes, they're giving him a call to see where he's at, because they do that with literally every player that's in the market. They want to know what players are going for and see what their options are going to be at what spot.
So thank you everybody for hopping. What'd you say?
I got to hop here.
Thank you everybody for hopping onto the program. Thank you, Neil. We are going to jump off the program. Glad we got that information in hot and fast. And enjoy the NCAA tournament. Everybody, go Steelers.
Hell yeah.